So at the end of last week's parsha, and we're going to see these sources inside, but we have a source from the end of Kedoshim as well as Achrei Mos that give us uh, some of the sources for this idea of chukas goyim. But as we're going to see, there's actually there's two other sources as well. One from Shemos, one from Devarim. So maybe we'll start with just by taking a look at the psukim inside and seeing, and then we'll see how they're sort of quoted as we go through the Rishonim and into the poskim. So the pasuk in Shmo says, "Ki yelech malachim lefanech ve'viyacha el ha'emari v'achiti v'aprizi v'akanani achivi v'yivusi v'charativ." So this is Hashem saying that He's going to, as He brings us with His malach, He's going to lead us into Israel, and we're going to experience the Shiva Ha'amamim, right? The nations that are already in Israel, and He says, "Lo shishtachaveh le'Elohehem v'lo sa'avdeim," right? This is a warning about Avodah Zarah. But don't do like they do, like their actions. And so we'll have to see what that means, but clearly there's already sort of maybe an allusion or a hint to this idea of chukas goyim. And then, as I said, in Achrei Mos, we see the psukim of Dabera b'nei Yisrael v'amart alehem ani Hashem Elokechem k'maaseh Eretz Mitzrayim asher yishartem ba lo sa'asu. Again, that's the idea of don't do as the Egyptians did. K'maaseh Eretz Canaan asher ani meviaschem shama lo sa'asu. Don't do as the Canaanim do in Israel. Uvechukos sehem lo selechu. So there we actually have that terminology of, and in their chukos, so to see what that means, don't go. And then at the end of Kedoshim v'lo selchu bechukos agoy. Again, don't go in the chukos of the nations. Asher ani mishalech mipneichem ki es kol ele asuva akutz bam. Right, so avoid what they're doing in those nations. And meaning the idea is that there's a reason why the 7 nations in Israel were either destroyed or their inhabitants left was because what they were doing in Israel was not okay. Right, it was the Avodah Zarah and all the other things they were doing were problematic, and that's why they couldn't stay in Israel. So, meaning that when we go into Israel, we have that same problem. Like we can't take on those things either. But then we have in Sefer Devarim, it says, "Ki ata ba el haaretz asher Hashem Elokecha nosin loch." Again, when you go into Israel, lo samad lasos toavos hagoyim hahem. Don't learn to do those abominations that they are doing. Don't learn from them. Don't pass your children or child or your son or daughter in through the fire. Different types of either sorcery, witchcraft, fortune telling, all these kinds of things that they're doing. Don't try to start asking questions to the dead. Why is this key to Avas Hashem kol osei ha'ela? Because this is again an abomination, and therefore that's not something that you're supposed to be doing. So, at least to the surface, through the psukim, we're seeing specific things not to do, but we're also seeing this idea of lo selchu bechukos hagoy. So, some of the questions we have to try to understand are we talking only about the actions, the activities of the 7 nations? Would this expand to other nations as well through the centuries? Is this only things that they were doing at that time when we were in Israel? What about things that more modern times? What's going on? So those are some of the parameters we want to try to understand. Like what is this? What does this mitzvah entail? So let's start by looking at some of the Rishonim and how they understand this. So we'll start with the Sefer Yereim. So he says, "Lo sa'asu k'ma'asehem u'bechukoseihem lo seilechu v'yareshem elokecha v'lo seilech bechukos hagoyim v'lo sa'aseh k'ma'asehem shel shiva umos." So he starts by quoting some of these psukim, and he says, he seems to be specifically telling us that it's about the 7 nations. Dichsiv, the Parshas Ve'ela Mishpatim, as we saw in Mishpatim in Sefer Shmos, Ve'aviacha el ha'emari v'chulei, Ve'chiziv basrei v'lo sa'aseh k'ma'aseihem. So it's talking about the Emori, but then afterwards it says, don't do like their, don't take on their activities or actions. Uksiv b'Parshas Achremos, Kamase Eretz Mitzrayim, Asher Yishavtim ba lo sa'asu, Kamase Eretz Canaan, Asher ani meviaschem shama lo sa'asu, b'chukosim lo silechu. So first it says, it mentions Egypt specifically, but then it talks about Eretz Canaan. So he says, Perish afilu einam uvdos ela ma'aseh v'chukosem shehurglu la'asos l'shem Torah shalahem. So he says one thing is, which is interesting, it says lo sa'asu b'chukosem lo selechu. What does it mean, these chukos? So one of the questions we asked is this general or is this specific? So he says that even if it's not something that they do for avodah zarah, it's rather something that it's just part of their, let's say, their culture or their society or something that they tend to do according to their precepts. Hesira Torah aleim, the Torah is telling us don't do that. So according to the Sefer Yereim, it's more than just these specific Yisroim that we're aware of things like avodah zarah. The Chachamim pirshu mahamasim v'chukim shehurglu lasos l'shem Torah shalahem b'Shabbos b'Parshas b'Ma'isha Yotza. So, and he says that what are these specific things that we're not supposed to be doing that the other nations do? Well, that's already stipulated in the Gemara in Shabbos, so Tosefta the Shabbos and Tosefta there as well. Monokol ma shahaisa kibla biyad chachamish ahiu mechukoseim ve'ein lahusif aleim ve'ein misvara ki'im b'Kabbalah. So the Yereim says something very interesting. Not everybody agrees with him, but he says that these specific things that are mentioned, we're not going to look at the Gemara and Shabbos specifically, but it's talking about different things that they would do in terms of the clothing they wore or the hair, the way that they would style their hair, that sort of thing. But the Sefer Yereim says that these are not simply examples, and then we would expand upon these examples. But this is actually, it's a Kabbalah, Biyad Chachamim, that the Chachamim understood that these are specific things that we cannot do, and that's it. It's not an expanding list. It says, "Ve'ein lahosif aleim ve'ein misvara ki'im b'Kabbalah." Kasher hiser hakasav al ma'aseh shiva umas v'chukoseim kach hiser al ma'aseh Mitzrayim. Now, one other thing is said is that we can see from the psukim that first it talks about Egypt, Mitzrayim, and then it talks about the Canaani. So he says that in fact it's really sort of connecting the two together, meaning that it's any of these ma'asim for Mitzrayim or for the others. Shahari hukshu zelazeh. So he's going to say that Mitzrayim is simply included in these. V'afagav de meforshe b'Toras kohanim al averos lav lafuke chukos she'enam averos tahatane muva chukos she'enam averos kedatane b'Bava. So he says that there's he says more specifically that we're talking about more than just the averos. We're talking about things that they have taken on. For example, there's a Gemara in Bava Kama that it says hamisaper kumi. So it's some kind of a haircut. A kumi was some kind of a hairstyle. Harizeh medarchi ha'emari. The Gemara in Bava Kama says you can't have that hairstyle. V'chayotzi bezeh. So this is more than just avodah zarah. This is again talking about some of the things that they're doing to sort of emulate them or to look like them. So lavir al chukas shnehem averos, but shtei lavim lav da'aver v'lavim bechukosehem lo selechu v'hochi masim besifri k'masei eretz Mitzrayim yocho lo yitu. So another thing he says is that there's two things that are going on here. The fact that it's saying that we can't emulate the goyim means that if you were to take on their avodah zarah, so on the one hand you already have a lav, we have a los aseh of avodah zarah already, but now you've got velos lechu b'chukosehem. That would be another lav that you'd be over on. So now if you were to do that, if you were to take on one of the avodah zarahs of, let's say, the MRE, then you would be over on 2 lavim, one of just avodah zarah and one on ubechukosem lo selechu. So that's another thing that he explains is that that's one of another reason why this is stipulated as a separate mitzvah, as an additional azhara, as additional warning for us not to do these things. Okay, we're just going to keep moving through because there's a lot of sources, and want to see sort of the differences between the Rishonim, and then at least a little bit how we bring it down. Lahalacha, at least in the Torah and Shulchan Aruch. Obviously, this is a big topic, a lot to talk about here, and we're sort of just trying to get an understanding of just the parameters of it. So the Sefer HaChinuch says when he talks about shelo lalechas bechukos hagoyim, so he says shelo lalechas bechukas ha'emari v'chein bechukas hagoyim. So we see that the chinuch right away is different from the Yereim, in that the Yereim said it's really just the 7 nations. Then he brought in Mitzrayim as sort of an additional one, but that's only because the psukim specifically mentioned, the Mitzrayim was specifically mentioned in the pasuk. But the chinuch says that it's lav davka, just those 7. It's v'chein bechukas hagoyim. It's really any of the other nations. Shne'amar v'lo selchu bechukas hagoy, because it says, don't go in the ways of the chukos, the chukos of the other nations. Asher ani mishalech mipneichem vodin lecho shar hagoyim. So according to the chinuch, it's going to be really, it's not just contained to the 7 nations and Mitzrayim. It's going to be really any of the other any of the goyim as well. Okay, and we're just going to skip down and look at the Mishnah Torah, the Rambam, who says, "Ein holchin bechukos ha'ovdei kochavim." Again, very similar to what the Chinuch was saying. It seems to be expanded beyond just the 7 nations. V'lo medamin lahem lo b'malbush v'lo b'seyar. So now we're seeing, and this is similar to what the Yereim was saying. It's not just we start with ovdei kochavim, but it's also don't be similar to them. Don't. What does that mean? Similar to them? He says not in the way that we dress, and not in the way that we style our hair. And other things as well. Because we're not supposed to go in the ways of the goy. You're going to get ensnared by them. Okay, so we can see from the Rambam though that again it's expanding to all nations. And there's this idea of not, sort of looking or trying to be similar to the other nations. So what I want to do is just take a look at some of the poskim and try to see, how is this really brought down in the Tur. We'll look at the Bach, we'll look at the Shulchan Aruch, and we'll look at the Ramah, just to sort of, put this together and see if we, how this really comes out. Okay, so the Tur. It's in Yordea, it's in Kuf Ayin Ches is the siman, and it's an entire siman just devoted to chukas hagoyim, but it only has like two or 3 seifim in the Tur, and in the Shulchan Aruch it's also only about 2 seifim. So it's a very short siman dedicated to this idea of chukas hagoyim. So the Tur says, Asur laleches bechukos haovdei kochavim. Ve'en tzarich lomar shelo liksom lenachesh leonen shekol elu meforashim betorah dichsiv lo toma la'asos ketoivos hagoyim hahem. So you can see where he's pulling these from the psukim that we said, especially those psukim in Dvarim, where it's talking about specific types of this sorcery and avodah zarah and the fortune telling and the witchcraft and all these other things that we're not supposed to be doing. Lo yimatze becho ma'aver bina ubito ba'esh kosem ksamim onim u'nachish mechashe v'cho v'chiba v'sho ov v'yidoni v'dorish el hamesim. So those are all the quotes from the psukim that we saw earlier. Elafila minhag shenahagu asr leilech bo. And the Torah says any kind of minhag. So it's not just those, again, that are going to be really specifically stipulated as surim in the Torah, but also anything that's noheg. That's one of their minhagim, asr leilech bo, you can't go in it. Dichsiv b'chukosehem lo selechu. So not only is it mentioning the specific things that are asur, but it's also talking about their customs that we shouldn't be doing. So again, very similar to what we saw, with the Rambam and others, that it seems to be two different things. The Sefer Yereim as well, that it's minhagim, but it's also in addition to the lavim or the specific isurim. V'chein kosav Rambam in hochim bechukas of de kochav lo medamin lehem lo b'malbush lo b'seir v'chios b'hen eliyah hayisrael muvdol behem. But we should be separated from the goyim. V'yadu b'malbusha u'b'seir ma'asav k'moshe muvdol b'mado v'deosav. We should be separated in the way, like sort of externally, to be able to be, it seems like, to be able to be identified as a Jew externally, just like the way that we think is very different. Our values are very different from the other non-Jewish nations. We shouldn't, if they have a specific malbush, something that they wear, a style, a clothing, or something, we should not take that on. We shouldn't be growing out our hair in the way that they did. And we shouldn't be growing our beards or or shaving them the way that they do. He goes further and he says our structures, our buildings should not be modeled after their heichalos shel ovdei chochavim. So we're not just talking about building a house like your neighbor's house, but we're saying that we shouldn't be building a building that looks like the way that their house of worship looks. And he says, what is the this you get malchus for misha karv lamalchus mutar bechol. However, he says, and this is taken from that Gemara in Bava Kama. We only saw the first part of it, but the Gemara in Bava Kama said you're not supposed to do your hair like this kumi. And that's because however, it said that those from the house of Rabban Gamliel, who were very close to the rulers at that time, they would do that because that they would be found in their courts and they had to politic or whatever it was that they were doing. So he was they were allowed. Excuse me, sorry about that. The seasonal allergies, I think, always get me. But so they, the house of Rabban Gamliel would do that just because they would have to show up in the courts or in the palace, whatever it was. So the Torah seems to be bringing this down as well. That anyone who's part of that, you're part of the malchus, you're part of the government or whatever. If you have to dress like that, then that's okay. So there seems to be some heterim for when it would be okay to at least, in terms of dress and that sort of thing. Now, one thing that we're going to see the Bach in just a moment. So the Bach is comments on the tour. And one of the questions he's going to ask is, just to jump back up to the top of the tour said, Asr lalechas bechukos ovdei kochavim. We can't go bechukosim lo silechu is what he seems to be starting with, but then he says ve'ein sarich lomar, and there's no need to, it's obvious, or it's almost it's a language almost like a kal v'chomer shelo likshom lanachesh, or that's when he enumerates all the things from Sefer Devarim of all the types of avodah zarah and sorcery and witchcraft and fortune telling and all those other things that we're also not supposed to be doing. So the Bach quotes it. He says, yes. Sorry, is there a question?
Jeff, I'm sorry. Yeah, before you go on quickly, and you may want to delay this, it may be coming later. But besides all of the prohibitions that are listed and were extant at the time, do you think this means that every time the goyim adopt a new kind of dress or a new, say, torn blue jeans or whatever, that would also be forbidden to us?
Good question. Hold on to that question because I think the Ramah is going to give us a little bit of a better clue on that. Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, and there are a lot of sources. So the Ramah is quoting from. We're just going to see it right directly in the Ramah. Okay. So he says he quotes the Torah. He says Yesh lahakshos my ve'in tzarech lomar. What does this mean? Ve'in tzarech lomar. Dika amar halo lekuli ama. These are all just different lavim in the Torah. They're all just different mitzvahs lo sa'aseh. So what does it mean? What do you mean? I don't have to say it. It's stipulated. It's a different mitzvah lo sa'aseh. So what exactly is the Torah? He's asking what exactly is the Torah trying to do? V'yesh lataritz mahadetane b'toras kohanim parshas achremos. Ikmase eretz Mitzrayim kamase eretz Canaan lo sasu yacho lo yutu netios v'lo yivnu binyanim kamosam. So this is the Sifri, right? Says that on Achremos that when it says that we shouldn't go in their ways, does that mean that we shouldn't be planting what they plant and building buildings the way that they build their buildings? So Talmud Lomar bechukoseihem lo selechu lo amarti ela bechukim hachakukim lahem lavoseihem ma hayu osim ish. So what exactly is it? No, it's not anything. It's not that they build a two-story house, so I can't build a two-story house. It's not that. It's anything that really becomes part of their culture. I'm sort of interpreting the words here. But it's something that is it's chukim hachakukim, like it's become part and parcel of. It's become into the fabric of their society and from their fathers. It's like something that these are traditions that they pass down. So examples: Ma hayu osin ish no se ish ve'isha no se isha isha nises l'shnayim ve'ish no se isha. These are different things that we wouldn't want to take on. Women are married to women married to two different men. A man is married to a woman and her daughter. Lekach ne'amar bechukoseim lo selechu perish ilu ne'amar k'maaseh v'gomer v'lo ne'amar bechukoseim hayisi omer. So if we hadn't seen this, then I would have thought to say v'kol shenikra ma'aseh asra Torah afilu b'devarim she'enu chok lahem kagon shelo yivnu Talmud Lomar bechukoseim lo davar ela bechukim hachakukim lem avoseihem. So, in other words, if he didn't say the fact that we can't go in their ways, then I would have thought, okay, anything that's usher from the Torah, you obviously can't do. We already know that it's usher from the Torah. We have it's a separate isser altogether in some of these things. Who are allowed to marry, the idea of avodah zarah, all that stuff is already stipulated separately. However, so that for those types of things, we're going to see what we saw earlier. I think in the Sefer Yereim is that there's another law. Now there's going to be two lavim. So if you do this, if you marry a wife and her daughter, you're already going to be over on the Torah for that. But now you're going to be over on ubechukoseim lo selechu as well. But it's also, so that's one thing that it's coming to teach me. But the other thing that's coming to teach me is all the things that they do. That's just part of the fabric of their society. And he says v'heim hanimusim. Those are the types of just their habits or their protocols or those types of things that they have taken on as a society. So those would also be things that we shouldn't be doing because of ubechukoseim lo selechu. Hine shepirshu lav zeh al masha kvar asotar ish no ze ish v'chulei sheover gama ubechukoseim lo selechu v'su isa hasam bechukoseim lo selechu v'chi ma heniach hakasu shlo amru. So I'm just going to skip a little bit as he keeps going. He quotes the Rambam. He quotes actually. Let's pick it up here. Okay, so then he says that we shouldn't take on the things that they as a society do, the types of the better translation is slipping my mind, but the sort of pleasantries or the habits or the things that they do. So what are examples of those? ובדבר מחקוקים להם כגון תתראיו תיינו בתי עובדי כוכבים הקבועים להם. We shouldn't be going to their, obviously to their avodah zarah. Again, that's because you'd be over on Tulavim. Ukarsio taynu bate mishtaot shalahem akvuim. These places that they would go drinking, maybe these were bars, nightclubs, something like that. Naginot, shosei shechar kach perish ba'aruch. Right, these are types of things that they as a society have taken on. That people go to these bars, nightclubs, whatever. They go drinking, they go singing, those types of things. Those are things that we should be separated from them. We shouldn't take that on. Rav Meir Omer. Elu darchi ha'emari shemanu chachamim. Rabbi Yehuda ben Masira Omer shelo tenacho v'shelo segado tzitzis v'lo tesaper kumi. The sphere the delav zet kolo hakol af min hagim minimusos shelahem she'ein alav isra mefurish b'torah zakaf rabbeinu techila asur. So he's getting back to that initial question, but what he's saying is that there's two different things that are going on. It's one is the things that we already know that are usher from the Torah, but then the other piece of it is that these other types of activities that we want to separate ourselves from the goyim, and that's what he says. He says, "B'hadar meforish ve'in tzarich lomar." So that's what he says. That's what the Torah is trying to tell us. Ve'in tzarich lomar. So all the things, in other words, all the things that were ein tzarich lomar, all those things that are already stipulated in the Torah, we know about those. We know those are usher. So ein tzarich lomar those, because we're already aware of those. This is simply coming to tell me that there's two lavim. But really, what the chiddush of this is ubechukosem lo seilechu. That's how the Bach understands it. That this is coming to tell us these other things that are not necessarily usher from the Torah specifically, but they become usher because they become things that we would only do because we want to emulate the goyim, which we're not supposed to be doing. Okay, I'm going to skip. There's another Bach. I'm just going to skip that and take a look at the Shulchan Aruch just to finish up. He says the Shulchan Aruch, same simon in your day, Kuf Ayin Ches. So the Shulchan Aruch says Ein holchim bechukos ha'ovdei kochavim. So very similar to what we saw in the Chinuch and the Rambam, that this is not just the 7 nations, but it's Ovdei, Bechukos Ovdei Kochavim, seems to be very, just across the board. We shouldn't dress. If they have a specific dress that they do, we shouldn't dress like that. Like I don't, this is Rosho, and the way that we do our hair. Again, so a lot of this we've already seen, but let's take a look at the Ramah. So he says, Hagab. Ela yehe moved on mehem b'malmusha v'bishar u'b'seiar maasav u'bishar maasav v'chol zeh eno aser ela b'davar shenahagu bo ha'ovdi kochavim l'shem pritzus. So how do we know? What is that litmus test to say, hey, this is something that the goyim do and we shouldn't do versus this is something that it's okay to do? So the Ramah, and this is from other sources, is that he says that the litmus test is that if they're doing it l'shem pritzus, shenahagu lobosh malbushim. Now, we have to understand what L'Shem Pritzus means in this case, but it seems to be anything that sort of would take us away from our tradition, from Torah, from mitzvahs, from trying to be Ovdei Hashem. Those are the types of minhagim that we have to avoid. So if he gives the example that they would wear red clothing specifically because that was something that was something that would sort of take away, and people would say, hey, wait a second here, they're wearing red, I want to wear red. And if that's the case, and you're only wearing it because they do, it's something that can lead us, I guess, away from what our traditions are and what our values are. So that's what we have to avoid. He says the other parameter is, if they do it just because they do it and there's no reason for it, if there's no reason for it, how did it come down? Is really the idea here. How did it become something that the goyim, that the Ovdei Kochavim do? Is it something that sort of came down through the ages as being, pagan in nature? And if that's the case, that it has some kind of root in paganism and of the avodah zarah, then it has shemetz, and his terminology is as shemetz of avodas kochavim, and we have to avoid that as well. Yeah. However, he says about davar shenahu gula toeles, but if this is something that actually has is useful for it, it has a reason. Kugon shedarken shekol misha hu rofe mumche yishlam malbush miyuchad shenikar bo. Right, every doctor in those days, maybe it's whatever profession, but if you had a profession like the doctor and they would wear something specific that made it clear that they were a professional physician, you're allowed to wear that if you're also a professional physician, because that's simply, there's a reason for it. This way people can identify you, people know they can trust you, etc. Then that's okay. It's only, again, it seems like from the Ramah that it's when we get into this idea of it's only for it's going to lead us away from Torah, that would be a problematic, and therefore we can't do it. Or if it's something that has shemetz of avodas kochavim, that would be another reason why not to take on, that activity or that minhag or whatever. So I guess about to your question about torn blue jeans, that could be a problem with the priestess. I mean, it certainly may not be the nicest clothing to wear, and certainly doesn't have a good reason to wear it. I mean, it's a little bizarre to wear torn clothing, right? That seems a little strange when you think about it objectively. So yeah.
I need to leave, but I want to ask you, Malchut shel din shel Malchut, or the law from the country is a law. Isn't that in contradiction here? Sorry, I'm gonna have to leave.
Oh no, that's a great question. But we'll talk later then. So just to answer Uri's question, so dina de machusa dina, that would be if so that might could be a problem. So I have to think about how to word this, but that's an interesting question, because that actually becomes a problem that comes down to it came down through the ages. I saw this in the I want to say it was in the response of the Chosam Sofer, that apparently in Krakow a couple hundred years ago, there was some kind of a gezerah that Jewish men couldn't get married until they're 30, and the idea was to sort of force them to. I mean, it was basically to make it difficult for them to the Chasam Sofer puts in the words of this is like chukas paro. They're trying to destroy us by not allowing us to have children. Basically, they're getting rid of period virivia, because they're saying you can't get married until you're 30. And Jewish young men at that point were getting married at 18, 20, something like that. So, if something like that, we would say, and he clearly said it was not dina de machuzadina. It's a question of is it a problem of shasa shmad? Are they actually trying to destroy us? And if they are trying to destroy us, then it's yavor yaharog yavor. So some of these become really more difficult, situations where if they're actually, going after us, then it becomes the opposite of or becomes another reason not to do it, because they're going after us as a nation. But if it's something similar, simple as this is the clothing that they wear, I don't know that would become dina de machusa dina, because there's no laws that say you have to wear torn jeans or whatever other crazy t-shirts or anything else. So all right, we'll stop here. Have a good rest of your day.